So we were talking while Janice was doing her meditation, which is probably against the rules, but
no disrespect.
No disrespect.
Right.
Charles is saying, great, they're going to be in just the right mindset when we walk up. So our kind of chat today is looking at like cultures and how we create business cultures and hopefully a larger society culture that really is engaged and connected. And so I'm really happy to have Charles and Scott here today as kind of representative of, I mean, I don't know how you guys see yourselves, but really representative of the entrepreneurial community and what it means to launch things and connect people, whether it's connecting around a Kickstarter or connecting around kind of local interests. And so our idea is to talk a little bit first about business culture and then a little bit about kind of society and how do we support more kind of true, authentic connection, both in the workplace and in the society at large, and kind of the roles you see Meetup and Kickstarter playing in that. So I wanted to begin with just the business culture. And as, I don't know if you guys were here earlier, but there was a mention of studies that say that business, going to work is the second most loathed activity of most people's lives, the first being going to the dentist. And yet there's this kind of younger startup culture that's really trying to address that and really trying to look at how we can create cultures where people at least want to come to work and feel like they don't need to hide their true feelings, they don't need to pretend to be somebody different. So I'm curious what lessons you guys have learned from your efforts in terms of like just a business culture and a business environment where people feel free to be themselves and where innovation, creativity can happen, and there's like a life, it's like life generating versus life diminishing. So
I've got one maybe story to tell or anecdote perhaps in that regard it's really small. It's actually a conversation I literally had this morning with one of my designers. I met her for breakfast, and we've been talking for a couple weeks around development within the company, and that she's involved in. And what I told her is like, look, this is the place you can be raw. Like, let's just put the SHIT on the table and talk about it. And it wasn't a confrontational thing. It was more just like, let's be raw and let's actually solve the problem. And I think, at least for me, I think there's usually, and Scott and I were kind of talking through some of this earlier, but this desire to make things institutional. How do you make things institutional? I think in trying to do that, you lose the more important thing, which is making things personal. So having breakfast with my designer at 8 in the morning is personal, and my relationship with everybody on my team, and not everybody in the company, but I certainly try, is personal. Now, that gets harder and harder as companies grow. We're 70 people, so I don't know, you guys in the audience are probably working at companies that are maybe thousands of people, and I've worked at companies that are thousands of people. But what I recognize as continuity between both of those two deltas, small and big, is those connections, and many of them can still exist. Like when I was working at a company that was 4,000 people, I had really deep relationships. Sadly, most of them weren't with the majority of my bosses. But there was one in particular that actually has been an advisor for me for the last 6.5 years that I've been doing Kickstarter, and that's been a very personal relationship. He wasn't my direct report or my direct boss, but somebody I connected with and strove himself to connect with individuals within the organization. So that touched me in a way.
So when you say personal, like how does somebody do that? You just say, hey, you want to go out and have lunch and you don't talk about work? Or like what are some of the elements that you think kind of foster that?
I think naturally you end up talking about work, which one would say is unfortunate, but I think just let nature happen. And if that's what you end up talking about, that's what you talk about. You start with what are you doing this weekend? Or when I got on the train, we shut the work conversation off. And we got into like, what are you doing this weekend? She's going to go crochet, get back into crocheting. So I know these things. I know now that she's interested in that. Yeah, I think it's just about...
Actually, go even further. I love these stories of I have a friend who's one of these people who works for Sheryl Sandberg and has, and she's famous for like, confronting you and saying, so are you going to have a kid? Which is totally inappropriate in a workplace, I guess. But actually, no, it is about seeing people as full people, and absolutely. My quick take on I have a hard time with this question of separating the work culture from the culture, broader societal culture thing, because and I love the comment that, is it Dave or Dan said earlier, this question about so if all those people at the hedge fund have a meditation practice, does that necessarily mean that the hedge fund is doing anything better for society? Maybe not. What I'm really sort of excited by, and to answer your question about lessons about work culture, is that at Meetup I can't imagine the separation between the culture of the company being sort of defined by the soul of it is defined by the change we want to have on the world. And so and it really is sort of a living be the change. In Meetup's case, we want to create more community in the world, so we have to be like a community as a company. But even beyond that, we it's the purpose or the mission of whatever you guys of whatever the organization is that really that I think is if done right is kind of so integrated into the culture of the company that it's hard to separate. And we're sitting in a place here that is been a real pioneer. I mean, when Google went out there and did the don't be evil thing, I mean that was kind of crazy in its moment, 10, 12, whatever years ago. And again, it's just a manifestation of this idea of hey, the culture of the company is really hard to separate from what the culture you want to see in the world. Be.
And the greater purpose of why that company exists.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like a lot of people I know, I was telling you were coming here today, I love Kickstarter. I love Kickstarter. They've helped me, whatever. Of course, you're just a platform, right, for that.
Yep.
So do you find that draws people to want to work at Kickstarter who just love to support projects, or how does that purpose that you feel in the world play into the culture?
I think it's really the, and I think what we look for when we talk to people, or when I go looking for people to come work in terms of like a skill that we need or something to that effect, it is understanding someone's cultural drive. And does the drive come from the same place where the three of us came from as to why we started the company? And when I talk to somebody in an interview setting, I tend not to do like a traditional kind of interview process. It is very much like my conversation with my designer this morning. It's just a casual conversation, truly trying to get to know who they are. And that's the thing that's most important for me. They're sitting in the room because they have a skill set. Right. I can dig into the skill set, but I really want to understand who they are. What's that... when things get tough, how are they going to respond? Yeah. How am I going to respond? How do we get along? And that is all about the relationship. I think in terms of people's general interest in the company, I think it is about that mission for the platform. One thing that I commonly say about sort of looking at the genesis of the development of the product and the development of the platform, we have always tried to stay out of the way. We're sort of a brand that doesn't want to be a brand in a sense.
You mean, but there's stuff that's raised, I guess, on Kickstarter that you might really resonate with. Whatever, I don't know what your political affiliation is, but there could be one Democratic thing that raises a bunch of money and one right-wing thing that raises a bunch of money, and you realize the platform is going to be used, right?
Yep.
In whatever way it wants to be used.
And that is true. I mean, I think so. Actually, there was a point that Scott had made a moment ago, or was kind of cusping around, which I think is similar to the similarity between the platforms is they're all at the heart. They're about subcultures. There's thousands of subcultures on Meetup. There are hundreds of subcultures or thousands of subcultures on Kickstarter, and they can all exist together. We have some definitions of what should and shouldn't exist, where the boundaries are at some level, and those are living and breathing things as well. But those shape the society, right? And I think, to Scott's point, there is this. I make a lot of architectural references, and so there's an architectural movement to blur the lines between inside the home and outside the home. And I think very much the same way in terms of both the business itself and the culture that is around and the movement that is around the business. We commonly bring people that run projects into the company to talk to them about and have them present about their project. We're curious, we're interested.
And Scott, you've started, I don't know, how many different companies have you started now? Several.
Oh, yeah, well, just a few, but
what are some of the
most failures and successes?
Most failures. And what if, because we were talking before this, what are some of the kind of mistakes, if you want to focus completely on mistakes, what are some of the mistakes or lessons you've learned that you've tried to apply in Meetup that you kind of wish maybe you had learned on the sooner side?
Well, I made the mistake at the beginning of not realizing that I'd still be doing it 10, 12 years later. And actually, I've long retired this like career of serial entrepreneur. I'm just a guy running a company that I'm going to be running for the rest of my life because I found the thing that I need to do and like to do. So the lessons are, the mistakes are you kind of, you get into something and you there's for those of you in like the internet startup world, there's this notion called minimum viable product. It says, which is really smart and really good, which is get something out the door as opposed to working on it for months or years. And I believe in that, but I also think that, there are way too few companies, big and small and otherwise, that are really asking the question of like, hey, if you're doing something important, if you're doing something that needs doing, what does it really look and feel like for it to be around forever? Mm-hmm. For it to really be something that is sustainable. And so, and that means taking really seriously this idea of, only hiring people that, hiring people that don't just solve that issue you've got this week, but having that long-term orientation. And I'm kind of obsessed with this long-term, orientation because it lately because because as we're sort of waking up and realizing that, okay, here we are, we're a company. We're not beholden to Madison Avenue. We're not beholden to Wall Street. We're profitable because people pay a little bit to use Meetup. Some people do, and so that keeps it all good. And this, again, back to that, it's a little bit of that sort of be the change you want to see. And I think that any mistakes that we made were about not realizing that okay, if we really believe that what we're doing is important. And by the way, I don't mean to sound so high and mighty about that. A great restaurant is doing something awesomely important. A great doctor's office is doing something awesomely important. Whatever it is if it's worth doing and is useful, so it's this this idea the mistakes I think come around thinking kind of taking shortcuts, not building a solid enough foundation, and more importantly not really asking the question of like, okay, so if we do have this great advertising business, is that gonna how is that gonna really screw up the dynamics and the alignments of how you're making the world you want to make.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I know. So Charles, just in the life of Kickstarter, did you feel like your vision and kind of purpose to the founders was really clear right from the beginning, and you guys had this kind of larger vision of the world, or did you kind of stumble upon it?
No, it's definitely.
People look at it and it's just like, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
It's just like.
A lot of people thought of that, actually. I think, so this story for us, Perry, who's co-founder, the guy who had the idea for Kickstarter, actually had it in 2001. So it's actually something that he sat with for the better part of 7 years before he met my other co-founder, Yancey, and then me. And then we had about 2 years since I came on until we launched. So there was a good long time that we went through iterations, went through cycles, learned a lot in that term. I think one of the things that I personally learned from that experience is don't contract work out if you can. I think particularly in those early days as somebody starting something that is that that would be your livelihood and is also culturally important. I think there's just that single motivation. Everyone needs to be aligned. I had tried starting a company before that and reflected a lot on my experience at my previous company before, where I was just a lineman, if you will. I didn't have any management responsibility, and factored in my reflections on both of those experiences and say the mistakes either that I made in decisions throughout that period. And one of the biggest ones I think that helped me in doing Kickstarter, even talking to Perry and Yancey at the early stages, really understanding who they were. The previous company that I'd been involved in for 6 months, and it was very clear that there was no continuity amongst the founders. There were way too many founders. They were all sort of pulled in without a real sense for what was needed. And so that was a lot of what I'd reflected on when approaching the decision with Kickstarter. Man, it's hard to actually look at Kickstarter and think, what would we have done differently yet? There's certainly a myriad of things, but nothing that really stands out that was so instrumental. I think it was maybe more the moment of just looking back and factoring in all those other life experiences that
But I think that what you're touching upon is that, because I've seen a lot of great ideas and a lot of great talent, but the cohesion isn't there among the staff. And so I don't know how many people are trying to create something like Kickstarter. There might have been like 20 or 30 others. But for some reason, when there's that cohesion, at least in the guiding team, the chances of actually it coming into the world heighten greatly versus people with a lot of the skills, but they don't have the personal connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, I can say without a doubt for the three of us, and then those that were the engineers that were working with us in those earlier days, it was a lot of passion, because that was the only thing that was going to get you through the day. I mean, we would work from, I know I was up at 6 in the morning and I would go to bed at 4 in the morning, and that was off and on.
Is that sustainable?
No, that is not sustainable. I'm still recovering from that, actually. And the best part, actually the most stressful part, was my daughter was born a month before we launched.
Wow.
And that was a moment. That was, I think, one of the things we're possibly going to talk about is life balance. And that was a very heavy reflection of life balance. Like, what would life balance be at a moment that I didn't know what was going to happen for either kid.
Yeah.
I had twins that year, right? And one was a Riley boy, and the other's a sweet girl, and that's the real one. Yeah.
Wow. So we can touch on that, the life balance part. I also had some questions just about, because it seems like both of your efforts are really about connecting people, whether it's on Kickstarter. I mean, I love getting, whether it's Facebook shares or email shares, where this is like, I find out what their passion is, because they send me something that really matters to them that I can support. And the same with meetups, right? It's like, how do we get these people to connect? And yet, we also seem to be living in a world where if you walk down the street in New York City, versus 10 years ago, are people actually more connected than not? Because phones and everybody's got kind of so many things that keep them pulls on our attention.
Yep.
And so I'm just curious how you see this world and this desire to both connect around causes and connect in person. And does it actually how does that overflow into the culture and into society, if at all?
I mean, you probably found out about that Kickstarter project while looking at your phone walking down the street, right?
I have, yeah.
That's the big question. I mean, and we at least for us, we knew part of the script was that we would lean on those other platforms as the bullhorn to get people in. That worked, thankfully.
Twitter and Facebook.
Yep. Email.
Yeah, I think the big interesting cultural question that's emerging is that the 20th century turned into us people turned away from each other and turning towards big media and big industry and big food and big finance and big big box retailing and all this stuff and now we have there's big servers, the big Facebook and big Google and big everything that is drawing a lot of attention. But the amazing thing that's emerging is that people are turning towards each other. They're literally they're facing each other more, and that is the soul of what people are doing on Kickstarter, what they're doing on Facebook and Twitter, how they're funding each other and teaching each other and sharing with each other, and so, you know, I mean, certainly there's this. I think there's a really critical question of, you know, in this moment in time, you know, do you you know, you either turn towards each other or you turn on each other you know, because the less you interact with strangers, if you're surrounded with that phone, it's wonderful to be surrounded with your friends and family, that sort of Facebook bubble, but or filter bubble, as Eli Pariser wrote a book about. But it really is an amazing moment where this kind of de-anonymization and humanization, where you don't have to just rent a car from, you know, from a company. You can rent cars from each other, or Airbnb, the way people are you know, turning away from big hotel chains and you know what Airbnb is, most of you. And so, yes, certainly use the internet to get off the internet, which has, you know, been sort of this like, you know, mantra of Meetup, but that's actually a little simplistic. The you know, the real question is how if we're connected, if we can fund each other on Kickstarter, and we can find each other and meet up, you know, if there's a meetup everywhere about most everything, you know, in every city, it really is. It's this wonderful opportunity. But I do think the designers, and you know, and we optimize for this design of not just, you know, put away the phone and you know, be face to face, although that is the heart of it. It's really a larger question of what world do we want? What, you know, I know that sounds just, you know, ridiculously grandiose, but it's true for, you know, I bet most of you, in whatever work that you do, this you know, I love Google and I love, you know, but like the whole Google Glass thing, like, yes, it's really good and it's really awesome, but I want to punch someone in the face who's wearing Google glasses, and
I'm sure you can find somebody around.
And because I don't want to live in a world. I don't want to live in a world where like I'm reading my email while with my daughter, or you know, and so this is more than just a, you know, an age-old question of like, you know, oh, what is the impact, social impact of something, but you know, like, because that's generally about what's the, you know, minimizing the negative social impact of something. I'm asking this question of what the hell world do we really want, like on a positive sense, like, and because you can watch lots of movies about the, you know, apocalypse, and we all have idea, we all know what's going to happen with climate change, we all know what's going to happen, all the bad things, but do we actually take a moment to say, what's the world we do want? Mm-hmm. I want a Kickstarter world. I want a Meetup world. I want a world of probably lots of things you guys are doing. And so, what was the question again?
Well,
yeah, the phones.
If I can say, I mean, I think there's a different quality of engagement when you're aligned with that versus when you're not aligned with that.
Yeah.
Would you say that's true? I mean, the people I know who are aligned with the world that they want to create and the work that they're doing on a daily basis, there's like a turbocharge element to being around them. Mm-hmm. And when people aren't, it's like life force can't move through them, and life feels like draining. And so what I get from you is like the more people who ask that and then inquire how their work, whatever work means, mm-hmm. can be an expression of that. It's like you're gathering from a different source.
Definitely.
I think there's.
And also, if we might have time for one or two questions. So if you have a question, there's 2 mics. So if you walk up to the mic.
Just 2 things on that. One is the looking at your phone, right? The assumption that we're not doing something social at that moment. And I think there is a consequence to just everyone looking at their phone. Like you go into any bar in New York, and most people aren't doing what they should be doing, which is connecting. Well, they are kind of connecting. They're sitting lonely at a bar, and mm-hmm. they're looking at their phone, and they're connecting with that high school friend that they lost touch with. And so I think about that quite a bit. I mean, there's a friend that, I'll pump Facebook for a second, that I reconnected with, or he connected with me lives in Florida. I barely remember him from like middle school. I'd ask my mom, like, for real? Like, who is this guy? Or is this just a scam, right? And there's other things that are going on. Those things always existed. But
your mom confirmed him?
She confirmed him, yeah. And so he's a real person, doesn't stalk me or anything like that. And there was just a piece of memory that got reconnected to. Yeah. And I think there's value in there. Sure, there's a consequence to progress. We're constantly dealing with the consequence to progress. But I'll give a little prop to Scott and Meetup. When I met Perry and Yancey and we started talking about Kickstarter, the one thing that popped in my head was, oh my God, this is like Meetup. Right, and Meetup was a thing for me because it was using the internet and using the web as conduit, just a supporting structure for us to get back together. Right, it was not technology for technology's sake. You're not even a technology company. We're not a technology company. Like, technology is kind of not part of the conversation, and it's. Design's not part of the conversation.
Would you say you're in the people business?
Yeah, I guess so. Business of culture. And I think that's the common thread that we keep bringing up. What is that future that you want to create? And for us, I always tend to look at it as getting back to Main Street, getting back to the people down the street. Interestingly enough, I was having a conversation with a cabbie on the way over here, and we were looking at there's a Whole Foods on Houston, right? And there's a huge complex above it. And nothing against Whole Foods or big buildings, this city's full of them, but guaranteed nobody in that building knows one another. Maybe the immediate neighbors, and they pass each other in the hall. But we're so transient these days, and so recognizing that there is that culture and that society of transience. I move every couple of years. Move cities, and as a result, there are things out there, brands or pieces of technology that allow me to stay connected to everybody in those cities that I've left my droppings, and that's important. It's a new world, so it's not the old world, but it's how do we reflect a little bit on the old world and leverage the things that we have around us to create that new future.
And not technology for technology's sake, but technology that leads to that.
Yeah, and I think in just our world as, technology startups or whatever that is, there is this shiny new thing fascination and some, I want to work at a startup. Right. Well, startups want to grow up to be a company too, right? They don't really, the real things, we're trying to start a business,
actually,
not
you'd be
a startup.
Surprised.
No, I know that's the problem, right?
Yeah, that's
like,
the problem.
The problem is too many people just want to start startups.
Right.
It's like, what? Like, what is that?
Right. It's sexy. I'm a startup.
I don't know.
You were saying earlier how it's often the startups want to be like big businesses and the big businesses want to act like startups.
Startups need to mature, right? Now, maybe they don't want to make the same, decisions that some of the larger and older organizations have gotten themselves into, so to speak. There is that new future that they want to create, the new company that they want to create, but you can't sustain, just to the question of waking up at 6 a.m. and going to bed at 4 a.m. I can't sustain that. The company can't sustain that. And company is people, so we have to remember that.
Yeah. Really quick.
Do we have one question, and then you are?
We'll go on all day.
This is one. This is
and
one.
They'll be around for a little bit afterwards, so you can catch them in and out as you can.
Yeah, I'll skip it. I want to hear from people.
I think there's a question here.
I love the word platform. You both have created amazing platforms that connected people and personally helped me move to this city easier. So thank you very much personally.
Interesting.
But I'm curious. I think there's the perception that platform means you've created this environment, you turn it over to the community, they do it themselves. I'm curious about the decision-making process you have to make where there's a project, I don't know, a book maybe that needs to be put over here, or maybe a meetup about a topic that the organization doesn't want to support. How does the decision-making about what to do about that happen in your world?
And what to say no to, is that part of it?
Or
how to get to a decision.
How to police it, for lack of a better word.
Okay.
Yeah.
Short answer is, if you stick with, I'm sorry if I'm like repetitive, but maybe call it consistent or something. But like if you stick with a vision of like what world do you want, so we think that the world needs something like Meetup as just sort of a vital plumbing for a good democracy, a vital plumbing for cities, and vital plumbing for community, and so therefore we're unlike Kickstarter. We're less about like you can't do illegal and you can't do hate and you can't do stuff like that. But we're not. People don't know like the rise of the Tea Party was off of Glenn Beck going on TV and saying you should meet up and told people to go to his meetups, and the meetups happened everywhere, and that was that. But actually no, the last thing I'll say is we've actually been inspired by Kickstarter a lot lately in that we went from actually having a higher filter and on meetups for a number of reasons, to sort of protect the integrity of it being really making sure it's sort of spam free and junk free. But there's a lot of gray, and it is weird to sort of be in almost like a governmental type situation, which I know Kickstarter finds itself in.
Yep. And I think that's the best way to kind of look at it. Like, it is the project you mentioned, and projects like them, I suppose, they get to the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. And they become conversations throughout the organization. So we have a little meeting that is a company-wide meeting every week, and we bring up some of these raw topics, and those meetings usually last a little bit longer than they are scheduled, because they can get heated and not bad. I mean, it's always respectful, and I think it's usually about getting through the conversation and just being open and raw about it. I mean, much like I described my relationship with the designer I had breakfast with this morning, is getting down to that truth.
People can air their concerns
in
a direct way. Yeah.
And that's the only way we're really going to get through it. And yet, those are tough. You end up having to come to pretty much a binary answer, yes or no, at times, and those are hard. And sometimes we make mistakes around those, and that I think is another reflection point, or reflective point, that's only going to move the culture around the platform further. I think there's this fallacy, or it's the world that I guess we've been living under for so long, that you can do whatever you want on the internet, and I think that's probably fair in some bigger sense. But the reality is we can also shape what that is, and I think that's our responsibility, is trying to create a certain part of society. We're not trying to create all of society. We're trying to solve this one area that we're really passionate about around the arts, and also trying to protect the community in ways that feel very lightweight.
Right.
So it is about getting reflective and getting.
Most people don't know Kickstarter is one of the rare companies that they say no to all kinds of projects. They say they say no to corporate sponsorships. I had someone who works for an ad agency, a friend, to say, "Hey, I'm working on the Ford account, and listen to this, is a crazy story." Emailed me, said, "Hey, I know you know the guys at Kickstarter. Will you introduce? Because like the top people at Ford want to meet with them." Perry, the CEO, writes me back. He says, "No, thanks." Yeah. Like that doesn't happen, and it's actually it's really and so and also just a trend alert for people who care about such things. Kickstarter and Meetup happen to be companies, and there are others that we don't want to get bought. We don't want to go public. We don't want to. We're just building companies, providing a platform, sustainable, profitable, and that's it's just a very intentful, long-term thinking.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's a great way to end. Our time's up.